Dracula was a runaway international hit. It was clear that horror had been reborn after its post-war lull. Hammer's pictures sent shockwaves through the decade that followed. They created a horror boom. And by the 1970s, when these films finally made it onto TV, they began to influence a whole new generation.
This is a Proustian moment for me. This brings back a rush of unbelievable happy memories. When I was about 11 or 12, my parents went to a parents-teachers evening, and they were so appalled by the fact that all the compositions I wrote were horror stories every single week. In fact, I remember there was one called The Day at the Beach, which involved a decapitation. That when they came back, I was banned from watching horror films. It's their own version of the Hays Code. And I was banned from getting this magazine, House of Hammer, with which I was completely obsessed. And it was particularly bad because that Friday night was a screening of a very, very rare Hammer movie, Revenge of Frankenstein, which was never on. And I was beside myself. And I went to bed crying and lay there in the darkness till I heard my parents go to bed. And then I realized that my sister and her boyfriend were staying up late to watch it. So I just went downstairs and watched it anyway. And that was the end of my horror exile.
My devotion to The Revenge of Frankenstein might have surprised Jim Carreras, Hammer's relentlessly pragmatic chairman.
Jim Carreras came to me one day and said, "I've sold another Frankenstein." I said, "Oh, well done." He said, "We start shooting in 10 weeks. I said, "Oh, good, I mean, fine. But you didn't ask me to write it for you." He said, I'm asking you to write it for me." He said, "And we're doing The Return of Frankenstein." I said, "I killed him in the first episode." He said, "Oh, you'll think of something."
But I have escaped the guillotine, and I shall avenge the death of my creation.
The Revenge of Frankenstein was very much a showcase for the talents of its star, Peter Cushing, appearing this time with a new monster.
Who is he? Nobody. He isn't born yet.
This modest, quiet man is perhaps one of the most underrated of British screen actors, and I'd like to take a bit of time to consider what makes him so special. This is Whitstable, where Peter Cushing bought a house in 1958, not long after his first starring role for Hammer.
We often hear of actors talking about a fear of being typecast. Whether you like it or not, you appear to have been typecast in this field. How do you feel about it?
Oh, it's never affected me. Well, yes, I don't think any actor really likes to be too typecast because I think as an actor you should and can do other things. But I love doing these pictures. People get enjoyment from them. So I'm very happy to be asked to do them.
Cushing's connection to Whitstable is marked in a small museum display, where you can even see the actual cigarettes touched by the great man.
Peter Cushing was always my favourite Hammer star, I think because of the tremendous sense of commitment he seemed to bring to every performance. His diction, his gestures, everything about him was immaculate. However outrageous the situation, he always seemed to bring a tremendous sense of authenticity. He would carry about the accoutrements of each character in his jacket pockets, even if they didn't appear on screen. And when he played Baron Frankenstein, he famously consulted his local GP as to the best way of performing a brain transplant.
If you've got to do something to do with what a doctor would do, if you've only got one doctor in the audience, he must be satisfied, otherwise he wouldn't believe you and he won't believe the rest of the film.
You must get the audience to believe what you're doing, because if you don't believe it yourself, they never will.
Whitstable suited Cushing perfectly. That sense of faded gentility, quietness, understatement.
In the last years of his life, Cushing used to sit here in this cafe virtually every day, discreetly hidden behind a pillar. How right that this most unassuming of horror stars should be found in a quaint tea room. Perhaps what made Peter Cushing the quintessential Hammer star was his Englishness, and that in a very English way, beneath that perfectly composed mask lay obsession, fanaticism, and a deeply suppressed passion.
Hammer had created a distinctively English brand of horror. But the effects of this triumphant reinvention of the genre would soon be felt far away from the home counties. In Italy, director Mario Bava was inspired by the success of Dracula to create his own horror film. Black Sunday mixed the violence and sensuality of Hammer with the black and white visual flair of the Universal era. It was the beginning of a new wave of Italian horror cinema, and what an astonishing film it is. It featured an unforgettable performance from a young English actress, Barbara Steele, as the vampire witch put to death in the opening scene.
I guess Italians thought that horror has to come from England. But, I mean, you can't disguise an Italian film, you can't disguise Italian cinematography. It is so sumptuous and so appropriate for the nightmare that he's trying to convey.
I shall return to torment and destroy throughout the nights of time!
It was very shocking to see this blood come out of this mask. Very unsettling and precise, wasn't it? It had this kind of timeless, fatal quality to it. Even the horse and carriage was like the Neapolitan funerals, horse and carriages, you know, with that sort of theatrical beauty and death and sex and death.
Hammer had pioneered this heady mix of sex and death, but Black Sunday made it even stronger.
Kruvayan! Kruvayan! I've been waiting for you.
In America too, Hammer's success encouraged filmmakers to revisit horror in new ways. Producer and director Roger Corman worked with even smaller budgets than Hammer, but created some of the most spectacular films of the era. Beginning with The Fall of the House of Usher, he conceived a cycle of films drawing on the stories and poems of American author Edgar Allan Poe. Corman's films are less gory than Hammer's, but as a child I always found them more genuinely frightening, more sickly, more unsettling. They have a uniquely queasy, dreamlike quality.
The dream sequences became a signature of the Poe films. It started out in Usher just as a sequence that I felt portrayed the situation at that moment, and the reaction of the audience was so strong, I incorporated dream sequences into almost every film. There was a heavy Freudian element to it, there was the sense of fear, and it gave me a chance simply to work with film, to dispense with dialogue, dispense with the story, just to use the film medium.
Hazel Court's dream in The Mask of the Red Death captures the sense of a genuine nightmare.
It had a totally phallic a series of symbols with the daggers and the knives slashing at her and her screaming as they approached. What I tried to do was to shoot everything interior, to make everything artificial. My whole idea was to stay away from reality.
Effortlessly inhabiting this surreal world was Vincent Price, the star of all but one of the Poe films.
Somewhere in the human mind, my dear Francesca, is the key to our existence. My ancestors tried to find. To open the door that separates us from our Creator.
Price's morbid eloquence has a timeless quality, which makes him convincing even dressed as a medieval prince.
If you believe...
Believe? If you believe, my dear Francesca, you are gullible. Can you look around this world and believe in the goodness of a God who rules it? Famine, pestilence, war, disease, and death. They rule this world.
Corman's pictures have dark and complex themes, giving us a type of horror which somehow taps into instinctive fears. Of course, there are shocking images, but more than that, these films deal with shocking ideas, principally the primal terror of a slow, conscious, horrific death. This has its most powerful expression in Pit and the Pendulum. And perhaps one can detect some genuine fear in actor John Carr's face in the film's climactic torture sequence.
I do remember while shooting that, John was a little bit worried about the pendulum as it was swinging closer and closer to him. I said, John, let me get in there myself. So I laid down on the platform and had the pendulum swing back and forth above me. And John said, okay, if you can do it, I can do it.
Corman's mastery of the shocking image is at its height in Pit and the Pendulum, and Barbara Steele was again cast as the victim. There's a particular moment when what is supposed to be your corpse is revealed in the tomb, which is a proper shock moment, and it's so hideous that they only show...
I know. Stephen King said that's one of the pivotal moments in horror, when that Corman, that moment when my corpse is revealed, that was like the first time they really wanted people to be repelled and shocked. It was on a really visceral level, and I guess they succeeded.
Even with material as distinctively American as Edgar Allan Poe's, Corman eventually found himself drawn to England and all things English, even throwing in a fox hunting sequence in his last Poe film. And he abandoned all his self-imposed rules about the need for artificial interior settings.
I stayed with that theory until the last picture, The Tomb of Ligeia. Frankly, I got so bored with my own theory. We were shooting in England, and I said, we're going out into the English countryside. It's going to be daylight, the sun is shining, and we're seeing the beautiful English countryside.